Hello learners, welcome back. Welcome to BSW 041 Understanding Tribals. Last week we discussed the definition and various perspectives on tribes, and this week now we move on to Unit 3, that is on tribal discourses in social sciences. So let us discuss this unit in detail. Now after going through this unit, the learner would understand how the issues of tribal development have been approached at various points of time from independence to the present times. It will also help the learner to bring together numerous studies together to present a coherent view on tribal development and form a narrative on tribal discourse. This unit will also help the learner to understand various theories developed by social scientists, anthropologists and policymakers on issues related to tribal development. This unit will also help the learner to locate the wider debates on the inclusion and exclusion of the tribes from the larger sections of the society. The Ministry of Tribal Affairs for the Scheduled Tribes, in their annual report in the year 2008-9, it comprises a substantial indigenous minority population. According to the annual report 2008-2009, Ministry of Tribal Affairs, the Scheduled Tribes comprise a substantial indigenous minority population of India. They consist of 700 groups. Among them, about 80% live in the central belt extending from Gujarat and Rajasthan in the west and across the states of Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Bihar, Jharkhand and Orissa to West Bengal and Tripura in the east. The northeastern states constitute 20% of tribal population. Among the southern states, Andhra Pradesh has the largest tribal population. With a very low rate of literacy combined with acute and abysmal poverty, the tribes have been majorly located outside the larger Indian society, and this has led to a debate on what approach to adopt with regard to the tribal development. Thus, the discourse on tribal development in India has been shaped by two interrelated issues. First, how to percolate the fruits of development and eradicate poverty among the tribal population, and secondly, how it relates to effects of socio-cultural integration of the tribal as citizens of the nation state and protection of tribal language, customs and culture. These two issues have occupied center stage of the policy making related to tribal development. The discourse on the development of the tribal can be studied in four phases. Firstly, policy of isolation or leave them alone approach, which is adopted in pre-independence period by the British. Second phase, the policy of assimilation or detribalization approach, and the third phase is the policy of integration and development adopted soon after independence. The approach is mainly associated with Jawaharlal Nehru. And last phase is the contemporary debate on the neglect of tribes. Now let us discuss all these phases in detail one by one. Phase 1, the policy of isolation in pre-independence period. The use of term tribe to describe people who are different from those of the mainstream civilization has been viewed as a colonial construction. Before the advent of the colonial rule, the use of term to describe the tribal population on the whole was absent. References to terms like communities, Vana and Jana could be found in ancient texts to describe the aboriginals living in the forests. However, the official recognition to the Adivasis as a category distinct from the rest is found in the census during the British rule, mainly because the tribal did not conform to the general pattern of the Hindu caste structure and religious belief system. Both the terms Adivasis and tribes highlight the secluded character of the tribal community. The colonial policy of exclusion of tribal areas were largely an outcome of the work of ethnographers, anthropologists, sociologists, historians and Christian missionaries studying tribal cultures in India. And the most important of the works includes that of Verrier Elwin. Elwin's study on Baiga in the year 1939, he realized that exploitation of these tribes was severe and this community hopes to have a Baiga Raj. where they have their own ruler and no interference and exploitation by the others. This study led Elwin to adopt leave them alone, national park approach or isolation approach. In simple words, the approach came to mean letting tribes live in their own way, not infringing on their economic space and allowing them to develop in their own self-created development design. Elwin's national park policy of keeping the tribals as museums, specimens became the model for administration. The British had adopted two broad approaches on tribal development. The first approach, advocated by the British, was to isolate tribes from the larger society and therefore separate tribal areas from the purview of normal administration. This model treated tribal communities as isolates, tribals as noble savage, and the primitive conditions as Arcadian simplicity. The tribal communities were seen as too subdued and innocent to understand the socio-economic processes and much more prone to the exploitation by the non-tribals and the moneylenders. Practically, the policy of isolation adopted by the British further alienated the tribals living on the hills, in forest and in other remote areas. The tribal remained unaffected by the benefits of the developmental measures initiated for the rest of the society. The current lack of development among the tribal needs to be understood in this historical perspective. And the second point of view saw tribes as animists on the ground that they belonged to a religious tradition other than that of major religions of India. Thus, they were a society unto themselves and they constituted a society which is different from the largest society. The concept of protecting the tribal communities from too rapid integration into economy and polity was born out of the direct nature of the British rule. So, it was a product of calculation on the part of British on two major issues. Firstly, the administration of the far-flung tribal areas, that would be difficult, and secondly, the total isolation also keep tribals away from the political movement developing at that point of time. Within the larger framework of the policy of isolation, legislations were enacted. The British promulgated Inner Line Regulation in the year 1873 that aimed to minimize tribal, non-tribal contact by controlling tribal industries and trade in the tribal areas of Northeast. The protection and the preservation of the tribal life and culture were also ensured by the enactment of the Scheduled District Act in the year 1874 that provided for special tribal administration. After implementation of the Act in the year 1919, the reconstruction of the tribal areas into backward tracts was made. The backward tracts were divided into two types. The first one, which included those backward areas excluded from the scope of reformed legislatures and the constitutional reforms. The Governor General in Council was the sole legislator for such areas and elected ministers had no responsibility for them. And the second type of backward areas included those areas that were represented in the legislatures, but the representation was neither effective nor adequate. By the Act of 1935, the provisions of the previous Act were made more stringent by converting the backward tracts into areas of total or partial exclusion. So, in order to achieve a twofold objectives, the British secluding the tribes from the larger society in the aspiration of the freedom movement, and secondly, further restricted the process of development among the tribes. As a result of this isolation approach, even though the tribal areas remained uninterrupted, the enactment of legislations like India Forest Act in the year 1878 and Land Acquisition Act in the year 1894 establishing absolute propriety of the colonial state over the forest land led to massive discontent among the tribals and resulted in rebellions in various parts of India. The isolationist model was indeed criticized as it was severely compromised on the ground that the colonial state's objective of revenue extraction made it adopt the policy as the tribal regions were richest in terms of endowments of forest and mineral wealth. A few roads were constructed for security reasons and to allow the British to exploit the forest produce. The policy of isolation did nothing for the welfare and development of tribals. Thakur Bappa criticized the isolation theory in the following words: to keep these people confined to isolation in their accessible hills and jungles is something like keeping them in a glass museum for the curiosity of purely academic persons. Now moving on to the second phase, policy of assimilation. Here there is another strand of thinking, the distinction between the tribes and the non-tribes as made by the colonial state is overlooked. The lineage to this line of approach, it can be traced to polemical works of G.S. Gurye. Gurye criticized the national park approach, countering the argument that the Hindus were responsible for creating poverty among the tribes. He also recognized that British to be solely responsible for the tribal exploitation. The individual property rights in land, creation of a land market, laws restricting the use of forest resources, and an exploitative excise policy were all British creations. He specifically writes about the loss of land among the tribes soon after the introduction of the British system of revenue and law. He also argued that Hindu caste had been in a symbiotic relationship with tribes since ancient times, and they both remained intrinsic parts of the Indian civilization, which British wanted to break by their isolationist approach. His writings on tribes, the aborigines so called, and their future made a case for the complete assimilation of the tribes with the rest of the Indian population. In fact, Gurye was of the opinion that it is misleading to call the tribes as aborigines, as they were actually only backward Hindus, and the solution to their economic, cultural and social problems lay in the overall assimilation of the tribals into the Hindu society. Based on this argument, Gurye divided the tribes into three sections: those who are properly integrated, loosely integrated, and those not more than touched by Hinduism. He described the tribes as Hindus. He says only proper description of these people that they are imperfectly integrated classes of Hindu society and they are in reality backward Hindus. He also makes an argument on the ground that there was much similarity between Hindu religion and the animistic tribal religions, and that the two could not possibly be distinguished from one another. This point was based not on field work but on the observations and comments of some of the census commissioners between 1891 and 1931, where they had expressed their dissatisfaction over the fact the tribes were described as animus. Gurye made his observation on very inadequate data and very selective use of the comments on observations of the census commissioners. The approach was criticized on the fact that complete assimilation is difficult. It would be difficult for the tribals to give up their traditional tribal belief practices and ideas. Assimilation of tribals into dominant sections of society would lead to a situation of caste conflict, as a non-tribal caste society is based on the principle of homo hierarchios, whereas tribals live in the society that is based on the principle of equality or egalitarianism. It was also widely recognized that tribal socio-economic structures, culture and value systems were completely different from the other non-tribal sections of the society, and therefore any attempt to force assimilation in long run could lead to serious repercussions. In this sense, policy of assimilation is seen as having aggressive and violent overtones. The policy of isolation and policy of assimilation came to be widely debated. The need to evolve a more comprehensive approach for tribal development soon after independence came to be widely recognized. Contrasted with British policy, the Government of India's primary concern was to focus on overall tribal development. Whether to isolate or assimilate the tribes into the process of development came to be widely debated in the Constituent Assembly. As the Government of India Act 1935 framed by the colonial state, formed the model for independent India. It was widely accepted that the Constituent Assembly debates were to be based on colonial propositions. During the Constituent Assembly debates, three important groups debated on the strategy of the tribal development. The assimilations favored the absorption of tribal society into the larger dominant society. The liberals argued for self-autonomy for the tribals. The group represented by Sri Bishwanath made a case for leave alone the tribes. Sri Bishwanath said that the scheduled tribes in the whole country should be protected from the destructive impact of races possessing a higher and more aggressive culture and should be encouraged to develop their own autonomous life. They should not be isolated communities or little republics to be perpetuated forever. Then now moving on to the next phase, there is a third phase. The policy of integration came into existence in post-independence period. The Constituent Assembly set up a subcommittee under the chairmanship of Takar Baba. The most important finding of the subcommittee related to the establishment of welfare and development of the tribals. The policy of integration, that is the policy to integrate the tribal society into the national mainstream, gradually was concretized by Jawaharlal Nehru. The Scheduled Areas and Scheduled Tribes Commission, headed by U.N. Dibar in the year 1960, later endorsed and elaborated this policy of integration as attempting not to disturb the harmony of tribal life and simultaneously work for its advancement, not to impose anything upon the tribals, and also simultaneously work for their integration as members and part of Indian family. Nehru approached the problem of tribal development in a very broader perspective. Nehru's interaction and exposure to the tribes of Northeast led him to the view that tribal problems should be viewed in their own context, as a tribal economy could not be separated from cultural disposition and sovereignty. Nehru expressed his opinion on the tribal development in the following words: I have no doubt that development and change and so-called progress will come to them, because it is becoming increasingly difficult for any people to live their isolated life cut off from the rest of the world. But let this development and change be natural and be in the nature of self-development, with all the help one can give in the process. Nehru did not favor permanent isolation of the tribes from the mainstream civilization, but suggested their protection from exploitative nature of the larger Indian society. After independence, the struggle of the Nagas for independence came to be viewed as a struggle for land, nationality, and cultural autonomy. These developments transformed the outlook of Nehru towards the tribes and solved their problems through the policy of integration. Integration needs to be distinguished from assimilation. While assimilation is partial and involuntary subservience, integration, in contrast, is a respectful merger with the mainstream, staking a claim to an equal share of power and resources as citizens. Though influenced by Elwin, Nehru advocated the principle of avoiding two extremes. In a foreword to the second edition of Elwin's book, A Philosophy of NEFA, that is Northeast Frontier Agency, in the year 1959, Nehru spelled out his punch shield or 5 cardinal principles concerning the government's attitude towards the tribals in order to prevent the loss of identity and culture and also for their development. Now let us see the 5 cardinal principles. The people should develop along the lines of their own genius, and we should avoid imposing anything on them. We should try to encourage in every way their own traditional arts and culture. Tribal rights in land and forest should be respected. We should try to train and build a team of their own people to do the work of administration and development. Some technical personnel from outside will no doubt is needed, especially in the beginning, but we should avoid introducing too many outsiders into the tribal territory. We should work rather through and not in rivalry to their social and cultural institutions. We should judge results not by statistics of the amount of money spent, but the quality of human character that is involved. Now, Nehru, in his development policy, came to be seen as based on the value of gradualism and passive interference of the state alongside all other philanthropic overtones. And in accordance with the policy of integration, 43 sub-multipurpose projects were established and a committee appointed under the chairmanship of Elvin to examine the programs of these blocks. Further, a Debar committee was appointed in the year 1960 to report on the administration of the scheduled areas. The Elvin report and the Debar committee report exemplified the 5 fundamental principles advocated by Nehru for tribal development. Since then, tribal development has been based on two-pronged approach. Firstly, the promotion of development activities to raise their level of living. Secondly, the protection of their interests through legal and administrative support. Several provisions conforming to the above principles came to be adopted in the Constitution for the upliftment of the tribal societies. Government of India made it practical through constitutional guarantees under 5th and 6th schedules of the Indian Constitution. The Constitution of India has come to include several provisions for tribes, including proportional representation in legislatures, right to use their own language, culture and customs, provision of reservation for educational and job opportunities. The tribal sub-plan adopted from the 5th 5-year plan onwards is a major instrument of socio-economic development of the tribals. The main objective of the tribal sub-plan was to bridge the development gap between the tribes and non-tribal communities and to improve the quality of life of tribal people. The Nehru-Elvin policy followed in first decade of independence came under severe criticism as it was widely recognized that the administration of the northeastern tribal areas was not at all satisfactory and that there was too much focus on the political and administrative development while the economic development of tribes was ignored. Panchsheel was in disagreement with the policy of industrialization for the rest of India. Since tribal areas are also the most resource-rich areas, the process of industrialization was brazen with regard to tribal rights on land, water and forest. The Nehruvian approach could not retain its inclusive zeal and most of the development programs introduced by Nehru caused massive displacement. The approach also came to be criticized on the ground that there remained gaps between the development model and the protection policy for the tribals. Thus, the Nehru-Elvin policy of gradual integration was replaced by the policy of progressive politico-economic and cultural integration of the tribal people in order to speed up their socio-economic development. So, in order to achieve this, Government of India pursued the agenda of modernization of backward tribal areas. Now, the next last phase, contemporary debates and the policy of neglect. With the onset of liberalization era in 1980s, the Government of India further enhanced its support to the tribal areas. Within the ambit of development model, the subsequent governments pursued the policy of earmarking funds to the tribal regions to address the problems of underdevelopment and improving system of governance. And in the 6th 5-year plan, the fourfold policy for the tribal development, integration of the services at the delivery point of beneficiary, development of the service from the bottom upwards, development of the skills to diversify occupation, and introduction of the latest technology based on local materials and local skills. There has been general agreement among the scholars who are studying tribal development that the Indian state has failed to bring basic structural transformations among the tribal communities. Major problems that the tribes face today relates to distortion introduced in their socio-economic life due to recent economic development. The ever-increasing interactions of tribals with the non-tribals have led to increasing exploitation and discrimination of the tribes. Despite the policy of integration and the wide array of protective legislations, the Indian state has failed to protect tribal communities from exploitation. The reservations have benefited few tribal communities by providing jobs. Even though the process of decentralization has expanded the scope of tribal participation in politics, land alienation, migration, educational backwardness, and indebtedness continue to remain major obstacles for their development. Induced development has become a major human right issue as it has resulted in marginalization of tribal families. The state has been indifferent to these problems that have led to emergence of dependence and disadvantage among the tribes. Underlying this, the discriminatory treatment meted out to the Indian tribes during the course of development. The new economic regime has led to privatization and marketization of economy, and it has been treated as a powerful threat for the tribal communities. Currently, the scheduled tribes continue to suffer from all the disadvantages associated with ethnic or minority community. While on the one hand, the forces of globalization have posed renewed threats to livelihoods of one of the most marginalized sections of Indian society, such as STs. On the other hand, the state has not been able to provide livelihood security to the tribals. Several cases of tribal destitution and loss of access to land and livelihoods have been coming from the state of Orissa and West Bengal, to name a few states. Guha shows the first colonial British state and then independent India have laid bare vast tracts of forest and turned them into agricultural land, impoverishing and subordinating the tribals and simultaneously creating ecological disaster. In addition, different state governments have also adopted number of legislations to evacuate the tribals from the forest. The achievements of the state remain limited to protecting the civil and social rights of the tribals. The state continues to face difficulties in protecting the tribal culture, which forms the main principle of policy of integration. The policy of integration has been met with criticism as it has focused on absorption tendencies rather than integrating the tribes. Separateness and exclusion continue to remain the principal characteristics of the tribal communities. Noting on the process, Zaxa advocates there has been aggressive incorporation of tribes into the language and religion of the dominant community. But in respect of providing tribals access to the fruits of development, such incorporation on the whole have been avoided and even resisted. As the functioning of democratic forces has become stronger, a resentful local leadership has emerged among these communities, sponsoring movement for either a separate state or political economy or even separation from the union. Now, let us sum up the whole thing, what you have gone through in this unit. In this unit, the learner would have studied about the development of tribal discourse in India. Tribal discourse has been understood in 4 phases, what we have discussed earlier, that is in the pre-independence period. Policy of isolation was adopted that focused on keeping the tribals away from the dominant non-tribal society. The policy of isolation came to be criticized by the policy of assimilation, which is also important discourse on tribal development. The shortcomings of policy of isolation and policy of assimilation came to be recognized by the policy makers in independent India, who envisaged the policy for integration for the tribes. The policy of integration, unlike policy of isolation and policy of assimilation, focused on integrating the tribes with larger sections of society in the process of development. The policy of integration, however, fell short in meeting its objectives. Then later on, the discourse on the tribal development centers on issues of development of tribal identity resulting from continued exploitation, indebtedness and development-induced displacement and land alienation. The discourse on tribal identity has been shaped on 2 issues, that is, one, the integration of the tribals into the nation state and the larger sections of the society and their assimilation into the Hindu fold. So still the debate is ongoing. Even though a large number of welfare policies and constitutional provisions have been enacted by the government of India, it is widely accepted that the tribal communities continue to live in poverty. Again, they are subjected to exploitation and discrimination. the integration approach adopted by independent India has its own limitation. So as a result, the tribes continue to face socio-economic deprivation. If we look at in the recent times, there has been emergence of movements among the tribes based on identity and revolving around an issues of livelihood. This emergence, it has to be understood in the context of isolation, assimilation and integration that define the relationship of the tribes with respect to the state at various points of time. It is the last and continuing phase of neglect where the tribes have benefited from the reservation and other policies have questioned and staged a revolt against the state. So thank you learners. I hope you would be learning this unit this week. Hope to meet you next week.